So welcome, everybody. I've met you all, but just by way of reminder, I'm Sarah Flitner, and I'm going to turn right over to Travis. But first, I will to Travis and to Ashley. Very quickly, our meeting objectives are pretty clear today. You will be receiving some pretty voluminous documents in the next week or 10 days. Just sort of highlighting what the findings are so far, organizing the data so far, and going towards some mitigation measures, which we will, Travis will overview. Just a couple of quick highlights with regard to today's purpose. Obviously, you are not responsible for reviewing a document you don't yet have. But you will have a month at least to review that document. As soon as the project team gets it on April 7th, they'll have 2 weeks to review it. And as soon as they are done, it'll go to all of you at stakeholder group members, and you will have, I think we said, did we stay 4 weeks?
Yeah, and I'll remind everyone of that at the end here.
Okay. Because I just realized I may have got misspoken on some of the dates, but plenty of time is the main point, because we really do value your input and want to give you time to review what TriHydro is finding. With that, Travis, I think I might as well go right straight over to you, and you can kind of give the high level key themes. And then, as you all know, we'll be breaking into some smaller group discussions so that you can really weigh in on your ideas around mitigation strategies for stormwater, and you'll have a chance to do that in smaller configurations.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And I think Sarah pretty much touched on our objectives today. And our goal in the next 15 to 20 minutes is just provide a high-level overview of what you'll be seeing in the stormwater focused report here. They'll be coming out, in the next couple weeks. Really the big focus is we want to hear from you. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt Burke, who's going to discuss our stormwater evaluation. Matt?
Thank you, Travis. So our stormwater evaluation, we were focusing on the impacts, the water quality impacts from point sources and non-point sources. So point sources, for those who don't know, are defined as a discharge that comes from any discernible and discrete conveyance system. So these are discharges at specific locations from something like a pipe, a culvert, or a ditch, some type of man-made engineered system. So most point sources, if not all of them, are actively permitted and monitored. In contrast, non-point sources are defined as anything that is not a point source. So they're usually diffuse drainage pathways that cover, large areas of land. Since they're vague, sometimes they can be harder to locate and quantify. However, they're likely contributing to some of the ongoing WDEQ classified impairments on Fish Creek and Flat Creek, and we'll touch more on that in some later slides. So also in our evaluation, we reviewed many of the reports and studies that have been conducted within the county, and most, if not all of them, recommended further monitoring and characterization studies. And we make some similar recommendations, which I'll touch on some more later, just due to some of the water quality gaps that we identified in our evaluation. Next slide, please. So point sources, as I said, come from a specific location, and they're usually covered under some type of permit. The most common permit in the state of Wyoming is the Wyoming Pollution Discharge Elimination System, or WQMP. So every entity in the state of Wyoming has to obtain a WQMP permit if they have any point source discharge to a surface water. The WQMP permits regulates the entity's discharge at their defined outfall, and they're evaluated on a case-by-case basis. the permit can cover the flow volume or the concentrations of specific effluents in the discharge. So in our evaluation, we identified 12 active WQDs outfalls within the county. In this figure on the right, they're the blue dots, and they're kind of scattered around the town of Jackson. And some of the common constituents we saw that are covered under WQDs permits are E. coli, pH, nitrates and nitrites, and ammonia. So for construction activities, there's 4 different state and local permits that cover construction projects of different sizes, but they all make sure that stormwater is properly managed on site to mitigate the impacts of construction activities on surrounding water quality. And in our review, we found 13 active construction projects that have large construction general permits that are covered under the WDEQ. And lastly, there's a handful of specialized permits that cover specific like industrial operations. These can be mining operations, solid waste facilities, some specific remediation activities, and storage tanks that hold petroleum. And all these specialized permits are very different, obviously, but they all have the requirement of managing stormwater in some capacity to help mitigate their impacts on surrounding areas. So this is either achieved by properly managing their stormwater runoff that's generated on site before it leaves the site, or ensuring that precipitation that falls on site stays on site so it doesn't impact surrounding areas. The other point source we evaluated were municipal stormwater systems. That's specifically within the town. So stormwater systems were first created just to alleviate flooding, but some cities like the town of Jackson have started to incorporate treatment into their systems. This can be achieved through installing inline treatment within the pipe network or constructing wetlands outside of a stormwater system outfall. Both of these are currently installed within the town system in different capacities. The town is also currently preparing a stormwater management program, and this is going to be a successor to the surface water drainage infrastructure plan that was published in 2001. And it's going to include some new guidelines and recommendations for stormwater management. So be on the lookout for that in the near future. So our evaluation of non-point sources started by identifying different pathways non-point sources can enter surrounding water bodies. And the first is through snowmelt. So as snow falls, it can experience atmospheric deposition. This is the natural transfer of elements that are occurring in the ambient air to the ground. So as snow falls, it can intercept elements like nitrogen that are already occurring in the air and bring them to the ground. And snow also has the unique ability not only to hold these different constituents, but also accumulate them throughout an entire winter season. And this can become an issue with the naturally occurring snowpack. So on average, the county can accumulate a snowpack of 57 inches throughout the winter season. And in that entire snowpack, it's accumulating nutrients like nitrogen through the atmospheric deposition. And this becomes an issue when the snow starts to melt in the spring. This graph on the right shows some hydraulic trends, specifically for Fish Creek, but the generic trends can be extrapolated to other water bodies. So the gray line on the left is showing the snow water equivalent. And the blue line is showing the average stream flow for Fish Creek. And as you can see, as the snow starts to decrease and melt in March and April, we have a big spike in stream flow. And you can also see right there in April, we have our highest concentration of nitrates. And so it definitely appears snowmelt is influencing water quality and water flows in surface waters. And we also found some data throughout the Rocky Mountains in Colorado and Wyoming that also illustrated this relationship where streams had the highest concentration of nitrates in the early spring snowmelt months. So snow storage follows a similar pattern, but it has more human influences. So as snow is plowed from downtown streets and parking lots and relocated to snow storage locations, it not only accumulates the nutrients from atmospheric deposition, but it also accumulates salts and metals that occur from road salting and de-icing activities. So similarly, once snowmelt begins, the snow stored in these locations starts to melt and can influence surrounding water bodies, but it can also be issues in the later spring and summer months. Some of these constituents, like the nutrients and salts, can absorb onto sediments in these snow storage locations. So if they're not carried off during the snowmelt months, they can be carried on to water bodies in spring and summer rainfalls as stormwater runoff. Which leads us directly to stormwater runoff. So stormwater runoff, the main concerns are from urban and agricultural runoff. This figure on the right shows the agricultural areas in green, and the orange areas are the National Elk Refuge and the feed grounds from the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. Those are covered in a bit more depth in volume 4, which is the wildlife and recreation section. But specifically for agriculture, the main concerns with their runoff is from fertilizer use, which can be sources of nitrogen and phosphorus, and also livestock waste, which also can contribute nutrients, but can also be sources for E. coli. And you can see the green areas are pretty concentrated around Fish Creek and Flat Creek, as well as Snake River. So it is likely, or it's possible, that these are contributing to the ongoing impairments of Fish Creek and Flat Creek. Urban runoff has been shown to have higher amounts of constituents. This can be heavy metals, nutrients, really anything you find on the ground in an urban area can be mobilized by stormwater runoff. The land development regulations for the town and the county, they both require natural resource buffers, and this is in an effort to help reduce the impact of the stormwater runoff that's not captured by a municipal storm system. Aesthetic ponds are a pretty unique non-point source because at first they're the receptor of runoff. So they'll receive, it can be agricultural or urban runoff, or whatever the surrounding land use is, they receive this runoff and they can have high concentrations of constituents. There's little data, so it was really hard to really quantify what their impact is, but we think there's some possible interactions between the aesthetic ponds and groundwater systems. So in addition to the different pathways, we also evaluated some specific constituents of concern. And that was nutrients, primarily nitrogen and phosphorus, and the trace constituents from pesticides and herbicides. So the main sources for nitrogen and phosphorus is atmospheric deposition, which again is the natural transfer of elements that are occurring in the ambient air to the ground. Other sources include fertilizer use from lawns and parks, golf courses, agriculture, also livestock and pet waste, again, are nutrient sources as well as sources of E. coli and other bacteria, and small wastewater facilities. These are technically a non-point source, and we included them in some of our nitrogen loading calculations, which you can see on the right. But these are covered in more depth in volume 2, which is the wastewater volume. So in these pie charts, these are estimations of nitrogen and phosphorus loading within the county. And you can see atmospheric deposition is the main, estimated to be the main source of nitrogen loading within the county. Again, this is because it's a natural process and it can happen over the entire county. It's not dependent on land use like fertilizers for agriculture on golf courses are limited to those properties, but atmospheric deposition can happen virtually everywhere. Phosphorus loading appears to be the primary source from golf courses. Those are known fertilizer users. And it's pretty crazy to see. It's 95%. For trace constituents, we primarily focused on pesticides and herbicides. So pesticides and herbicides are covered under the DEQ's general pesticide discharge permit. And on top of that, applicators have to obtain a license through the Department of Agriculture's pesticide program. So the general pesticide discharge permit takes into account a total maximum daily load for each intended application. So there is a couple layers of oversight for these chemicals. Historically, pesticides and herbicides have not been detected in public water systems within the county. There have been a few instances of spills, but those have all been properly reported and managed. We did review a study from 2014 that did detect low levels of organic compounds similar to what's found in pesticides and herbicides. These low levels were in samples taken from aquifers that coincided with agricultural operations as well as population centers. And these areas are typically more susceptible to anthropogenic activities. And so here are some of the potential mitigation measures that we have recommended. This is not an all-inclusive list, but just some of the ones we wanted to highlight in this presentation. The first is to implement a county-wide surface and groundwater monitoring program. We recommend at first starting with some of the key water bodies of concern like Fish Creek and Flat Creek and the Snake River, and then to strategically pick sampling locations upstream and downstream of non-point sources or point sources of concern, some of the ones that we have identified in this presentation. And then in conjunction with that, we also recommend establishing baseline concentrations of the water quality constituents that are being monitored. So this will be good once there's sufficient data to fully understand what the water quality looks like and what some of the seasonal fluctuations may be. Setting these baseline concentrations can help the town and the county actively monitor and adapt to water quality conditions before any major issues arise. They can adapt in real time and try to make adjustments as needed. And this data can also be useful in helping set TMDLs if that situation ever arises. We also recommend creating some snow storage guidelines to help snow storage operators mitigate their impact on surrounding water quality. We also suggest to incorporate green infrastructure in urban stormwater management. Green infrastructure can be anything from wetlands, rain gardens, or vegetative buffers. These have been shown to not only improve surrounding water quality, but improve the quality of stormwater runoff and increase aesthetic value. And it may be worth considering to provide incentives to developers to utilize green infrastructure in their projects to help manage stormwater. And lastly, we recommend characterizing the impacts of aesthetic ponds on surface water and groundwater. There was little data on these systems, so it was hard to quantify their impact. They are rather complex systems, so characterizing a study to better understand them will not only be helpful to address any water quality issues, but will be helpful moving forward with any future ponds that might be developed. So overall, the point sources and non-point sources, they're likely contributing to water quality issues within the county. The lack of water quality data has made it hard to really identify specific sources and issues, as well as naturally occurring sources have made it difficult to identify any specific impacts from point sources and non-point sources. And with that, I'll turn it over, I believe, to Ashley.
Thanks, Matt. So thank you so much for that, a great presentation. The next part of this meeting today is going to be interactive. All of you will be put into different breakout rooms, and you'll have 30 minutes to have a discussion amongst yourself and address these 3 questions. So in a moment, I'll open the rooms and you'll join. You're gonna use the notes in this chat. Ready, 1, 2, 3. In the chat, you'll have the notes that are on the screen here. What we're looking for is for you all to come back from each of the 3 rooms and share your top threat to water quality as you see it, and your top idea in terms of mitigation. And then lastly, we want to know the top 3 ideas from your group that you discussed. So if somebody in your group could take notes, there's this note-taking template that I'm going to put into the chat for you. So there's a note-taking template, there's questions, and you all will have 30 minutes to discuss. Are there any questions about that? Carlin, go ahead.
Yeah, Ashley. I just was looking at the that phosphorus pie chart with landscape versus golf course area. And I'm pretty sure that the labeling was switched just based on the written report. Pretty sure it was lawns and landscaped areas represent 95% and golf courses the 5% or whatever. I don't think it's a big deal. I just thought it was worth noting just because just depending on where that took the conversations, etc. So little correction there.
That's a pretty significant correction, right? So we just got the numbers inverted. So
yeah, just a label.
The 95% contributor is lawns and the 5% is golf courses, the opposite of what we accidentally looked at. Is that right? Which, again, yeah. I know you're being kind and not wanting, we all make those mistakes, so no big deal, but
yeah.
That's
no, it struck me as remarkable, and so I just took a look at the narrative and the table in the narrative, and just I'm pretty sure it's inverted. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you.
Any other questions about process or anything? We'll have anything you need in chat. Go ahead, Kay.
Oh, Sarah, yeah. I do have a question on the 89% atmospheric deposition. I think there was a study done several years back, or probably more than 10, and they concluded about 50%. So, I'm sure this study was more in depth, but can you, so whenever you're saying stormwater, sorry, I have a cold, so my voice is probably cracking. Whenever you're saying stormwater, how are you measuring this at specific outlets, or are you talking about the quality of the surface water?
When we talk about stormwater,
difference.
When we talk about stormwater, it could be either concentrated flow or overland flow. So when you're talking about a lot of the non-point sources, that's a really going to be transported via overland flow or non-concentrated flow. So it's stormwater. We're using it as a broad term, I guess, during this discussion.
So, I guess I'm just trying, because it's such a major part, and maybe, is it fair to say it's kind of a semi-quantitative, kind of qualitative, since these things are difficult to measure? Were there samples taken of snowpack to determine the concentration and then understanding how much snow we get? I'm just trying to understand the qualitative versus quantitative part of that measurement.
Yeah, so it's a good question. And when we looked at the atmospheric deposition calculations, we utilized information from the monitoring station that's set up in Grand Teton National Park that measures atmospheric deposition year round. So that was the information we utilized. And then we also looked at, I believe it's the NRCS has a snowpack. They have a website where they are modeling snowpack based on measured snowpack at certain locations, and they'll model it for all areas countywide. So that was information we looked at as well to come up with these estimates. And again, these are estimates. And this was countywide, whereas that previous study was focused on one area or one drainage. So,
Travis, if I may just add one point of clarity there, thinking about the county scale boundary and relative to the Fish Creek watershed, which that previous study was conducted in, there's much more area outside of human development incorporated into that 89% atmospheric deposition piece. So I would say that that's the largest difference.
yeah.
Certainly, is just that the area included doesn't include developed portions in this study compared to the last study.
Okay. Another question. The small wastewater facilities, are you counting that as all the private septics plus the few, actual small wastewater facilities that are permitted? I heard 12. So I guess I'm trying to understand, was there a separation in that, or was that including, because I'm just trying to think stormwater and small wastewater, how are those crossing, or how are those combined?
So small wastewater facilities are the septic systems countywide. They are considered a non-point source. So we incorporated into this evaluation.
So how is that stormwater?
This is stormwater and non-point source is what we're looking at as part of this evaluation.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I probably got hooked up on.
And again, there is much more detail. When this report comes out, there's much more detail that discusses everything we've summarized today. So I guess I'd ask everyone to keep that in mind as well. But
Okay.
And with that, I think maybe we want to go into our small groups and discuss a little more so that folks can have that full 30 minutes. It seemed yesterday that people were wanting that time. So we appreciate the questions and the clarifications. They're important. So thank you for those. Right now, I'm going to open the rooms and you'll see a little button to join. So you can join your room. And again, we ask that somebody take notes and that you're ready to come back with your top threat and your top 3 ideas for mitigation. So we'll send you reminders partway through on timing, and we'll see you in a bit.
Thanks.
May I ask what the difference is between the 3 rooms?
They're just small groups so that
Ah.
you all have more space to have a conversation than in this big Zoom room.
Very good, thank you.
Thanks, Sandy.
So thank you all for engaging. Did that feel like enough time? No, shaking head.
A little better than yesterday.
Ashley, I think we will always fill the time given, no matter how long it is.
Awesome. Well, with that, we'll just dive into reporting back out. The first group was Amy King, Amy Ramage, David, Florin, Kay, and Roby. Do you all want to report out to us on what you talked about?
Sure, Ashley, I can go, but other folks in the team, please jump in if I missed something. We were just summarizing as we were ending. The top threat that we identified, based on 2 now studies of nutrient deposition, was atmospheric deposition. Something that we can't really control again, but something that's on all of our minds. Additional threats we identified: agriculture, livestock use. A challenge with that being that, urban runoff is a lot easier to route and treat than runoff that exists overland in rural areas, and just identifying that challenge. Fertilizer use throughout the county, and then also septic systems and snow storage, so kind of the entire wheel we talked about, but definitely recognizing the challenges of containing non-point source pollution in rural, less developed areas. We discussed a few ideas, mitigation measures that we've covered in the past. I think we appreciated the LDR requirements for riparian buffer zones, setbacks for development, but as well as riparian vegetation. I think is a big player here in reducing or filtering overland flow. Voluntary compliance to increase that distance is also a great tool. It was mentioned the Trout Friendly Lawns program that the Jackson Hole Clean Water Coalition kind of spearheads as a great tool to educate the public on why we should think about increasing that riparian buffer distance, not only for sediment, but also for other contaminants as well. We talked briefly about the Carnes Meadow stormwater wetland treatment area and its utility for 10 years now as a way to attenuate sediment and contaminants from Flat Creek. Wishing that we had more town and county space for areas like that. I think that's a challenge that we identified is space comes at a premium, and hoping to align with the town and county as they move forward with some of these mitigation measures for identifying parcels where things like this can be implemented, not only with stormwater treatment, but also with snow storage as well, locations for snow storage. With that, I'll open it up to the rest of my group if I missed anything, but that's what I have.
Getting thumbs up from Roby. Okay.
David?
Maybe the next one, Ashley?
The next group was Derek, Leslie Beckworth, Leslie Steen, Matt Bambach, Tanya, and Carlin.
I took the notes, so I'll share that out and then let my team jump in with, correct me or add on to things. If we were to narrow it down to maybe 3 things, impervious surface dominated every question that we answered. The reports pointed out atmospheric deposition and snow storage and fertilizer use and all of those things. And impervious surface is what brings that to our surface waters. So it exacerbates all of the other things. And in our, kind of solution ideas, we talked a lot about how thoughtful design to allow for on-site filtration and routing of stormwater to areas of infiltration, buffer zones, some of those things that were talked about in other groups, still connected to impervious surface. We also talked about a cultural shift around things like landscaping. So the importance of, things like the Trout Friendly Lawns program, but also native landscaping, and then really making those things cool and what everybody wants to do. Not just the, making it more ingrained in the culture of this place. And then we also talked about offsite mitigation. So even with all these things, we still need some snow storage outside of town. Not all sites are adequate for that. And so if we have those locations, they need to have some kind of systems through wetlands or other means to make sure that that water is being treated that snow melt is being treated before it enters our surface waters. So those were kind of the three main themes that I pulled out of our notes. And if anyone in my group wants to add to that or change it a little bit, please feel free.
You must have done a good job, Tanya.
Nice. Okay, so lastly, we have Chris, Lisa, Meg, Megan, Scott, Sandy, and Anita.
Great. I'll report out. I took notes. Try not to repeat too many things. I think we heard a few different ideas in our group. First of all, I think we talked a lot about PFAS and not just at the airport, which I think we're well aware of, but how this might be a greater problem throughout the community from a variety of sources, and something that we're not looking at or thinking about holistically in the community. We talked about stormwater runoff and treatment of snow melt at length, like it sounds like the other groups did, but I think maybe something we distinguish is that it's not just a town problem. It could be applicable to all of our development nodes in the county. And there's a lot of blurred lines between the county and town on this. One of the comments we had is that there seems to be a side gig of landowners that are using snow storage in the wintertime as an additional revenue source. And we really don't know where that snow is going or how it's being treated. We talked a little bit about flood irrigation, and that flood irrigation in areas with high density of cattle and horses could see some better kind of collector systems installed and maybe some best practices opportunities there. We talked about decorative ponds and their threats that they create, the proximity to manicured lawns. And then on the more of the ideas side of things, we talked about the need for education at a community scale of what products contain PFAS, the need for new snow storage areas beyond just the town of Jackson, coming up with some best available technology standards for snow storage locations, that those areas that are going into wetlands might be overwhelming the wetlands that are meant to contain them. A need for looking at the fuel usage that's going on with snow storage, and incentives to contractors to do the right thing. I mentioned the flood irrigation, wetland reservoirs, opportunities to work with landowners on that. Snow storage permitting, actually getting into regulating that with some similar to our grading and erosion permit standards. Stilson parking area came up, and that's going to be a welcome news, I'm sure, to Heather Overholster here on our team. But the need with possibly a new master plan and allow for some offsite snow storage there. Stream setbacks with snow storage, and then I have a few more outstanding questions that we raised that I don't fit anywhere in our list, but great idea about, could snow melters be used instead of thaw wells in the town of Jackson? What would that look like? Is there funding for projects to develop reverse osmosis systems? Can that be done at scale for snow melt and snow water runoff? Concern about the melting of snow and how that changes the hydrologic year and temperature regimes. And just the idea that nobody really knows where snow is going, where it's being trucked to, and how much fuel is being used to move and push it around. That's what we had. And if I missed anything, team, jump in.
I don't see anybody with hands up. Travis or your team, do you have any questions of anything you heard?
I don't know. It's good feedback and thank you for sure.
I think we're at the spot then. So that is collected and Travis already has collated some of the feedback from yesterday. So we will be using your input. Travis, maybe you want to just move right into next steps.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Again, thank you everyone for taking some time out of your day today to visit with us and talk through ideas and bring up questions. I do want to mention that we have provided the draft report focused on stormwater and non-point sources to the project team. So we're hoping they'll have a chance to get it reviewed over the next few weeks, get their comments back to us, and then we can incorporate those comments and get a draft version of the report out to each of you. Just a little idea of what this report looks at like. It's massive. There's going to be 7 or 8 volumes by the time we're done. There's a single volume just that's introductory, kind of laying the groundwork. And then there's individual volumes for stormwater, wastewater, drinking water, and wildlife and recreation. And then looking ahead, there'll be a future volume for future considerations. The PFAS discussion certainly goes in there, as well as evaluation of the mitigation measures and how those were ranked. But anyway, when you get the reports, feel free to go through any and all of them. We're really interested in your feedback on the stormwater report, and we'll be looking to get comments back by June 1st. And then we'll incorporate feedback and get those reports finalized. In the interim, we are working on other things, looking at evaluating or discussing future considerations and presenting those in a separate volume, as well as we'll get started with the mitigation strategy evaluation as well. And then, later, probably late summer, we'll be working on drafting the actual water quality master plan. The plan is to have that adopted by January of 24, and we'll have opportunity for stakeholder feedback and then ultimately public feedback on the actual plan itself later this year. So that's just kind of an overview of what things look like for us moving forward. And I think that was all I had, Sarah, other than, thank you again.
Good. So I think that concludes the business on our agenda, all of you. I'm just looking at my complicated screen. Is there anybody who has questions? Seems like everything went straightforwardly today. So yeah, I think we have concluded our business, Travis.
Great.
Chris, do you have anything else?
The only thing I would add is, this is on a continuum. And so if anybody has any comments that they want to provide throughout this process, we use the Engage Teton County platform. And I think we've all been receiving updates from that platform. But if you have anything to add, please feel free to reach out to me or any of the other project team members. And we appreciate all your time in this process. So thanks everybody for taking the time today and in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, you too, Chris.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, y'all.